Throughout history, as well as now in the modern age, there are plenty of examples where a solution may not have been provided to an issue without one secret ingredient. And that ingredient is crime. Now, this is a conceptual and hypothetical video. We're going to explore some historical references as well as some modern examples where crime became a necessity for survival. And we're going to talk about the most likely crimes you'll have to commit during a full-blown collapse scenario. Now, I want you to really think about this and ask yourself this question. Have you ever even committed a crime? And if the answer is no, how will you know what you'll be willing to do during an SHTF emergency type scenario? Like I said, this is all hypothetical and conceptual, and the idea here is to try to make you critically think about what you'll do if things really do fall apart to that point. So, historical reference first. Our founding fathers used criminal behavior to gain advantage against the redcoats on a regular basis. And this is something that I think about all the time. Without the willingness of our founding fathers to commit crimes, we would not have the United States of America as we know it. And so, here's some things to think about for what was going on back then, even pre-gaining our independence. Right before all of that occurred, the British tried to implement an import ban on firearms and ammunition to the United States because, well, and at the time they were just the colonies, of course, but the reason was because they were getting prepared for mass disarmament. And in order to actually achieve disarmament, it was suggested that they would only be able to do it through extreme use of force. So by implementing an import ban, they were trying to mitigate the amount of firearms and munitions that Americans had access to in order to make disarmament more achievable. Now, this grew a need for a black market to explode and a need for smugglers who were welcomed within the colonies, including some high-profile ones that you might have even heard of, like John Hancock, for example. Now, these people, these smugglers, like John Hancock, were already evading tariffs and taxes. And so adding firearms and ammunition into the mix was just not a big deal. And luckily, the Dutch had control of an island in the Caribbean known as St. Eustatius. And it was a free and open port with neutral status, which basically meant it was invulnerable to attack. Now, because of that, they were able to bypass this import ban on firearms and ammunition, which allowed foreign material support to flow through into the island, where then American smugglers could acquire said arms and ammunition and bring them back to the colonies. Even if I messed some of the verbiage up there, this is a historical context for the idea of committing crime in order to achieve a necessary solution. Now, if you don't think the Revolutionary War would have been an SHTF or collapse type scenario, I'm not sure what it is you're expecting on the horizon. But regardless, let's fast forward to present day. Let's do a modern example where crimes are being committed because of the necessity of national defense. Okay? Right now, Ukraine's efforts to deter Russian invasion shows the use of anti-personnel landmines. Now, there's evidence of this. We're, of course, not going to get the official story anytime soon, but basically that evidence shows that anti-personnel landmines are being used by Ukraine, and that's a violation of the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty. So technically, they're breaking a treaty in order to enhance their defensive capabilities against an invading force. They have decided that violating the treaty is worth it in order to accomplish their goals. The same thing can also be said about the fact that Ukraine has utilized criminal organizations to help their war effort. And the criminal organizations provide a lot of support, including intelligence gathering and bolstering manpower. There's been situations where organized criminals have come out and helped patrol the streets in Ukraine in order to deter Russian occupation. So a lot of crime, because working as a state directly with a criminal organization that's known to be one, is in fact a crime. becomes okay as long as it has an intentional goal at the end of the day, generally related to survival. So, for the American colonies, that survival was related to no longer being controlled and manipulated by the tyrannical British government. And for Ukrainians, as of right now, crimes are being committed with the goal and intent of deterring a Russian invasion and pushing back foreign invaders. So, can you really blame either of those entities for needing to commit crimes in order to survive? These are situations that could occur at any point in time, as demonstrated by these examples, and scenarios that you might have to actually ask yourself whether or not you're willing to move forward with, depending on what occurs. So, what are the most likely crimes that you may have to commit during an SHTF scenario here in the United States? Because there may be some decisions required by all of us that might not align with the current status quo. Now, I do want to say the books you see here are from the Professional Citizen Project, and it's basically the manuals you would require in order to, let's just say, let a concept or an idea survive. So, keep that in mind in case you're interested in some good literature. And if you're finding any of this information valuable, beneficial, or at least intriguing, hit the subscribe button down below because we're going to have all kinds of videos like this moving into the future. Now, the most likely crimes to commit during an SHTF full-blown collapse scenario are going to be crimes like trespassing. Now, why would you be trespassing? It's possible you may need to take shelter, or you may be involved with some form of evasion, and wherever you end up might not be somewhere you're allowed to be, or it might be considered private property. And at that point in time, you are trespassing, but it might be necessary for survival. So consider that to begin with. Now let's move on to possession of banned weapons, okay? During a martial law scenario or a foreign occupation, most of the time you're going to have limitations and restrictions on weapons. Think about what happened after Hurricane Katrina. This is something where you would likely be committing a crime if you maintained and kept your weapons even though they were banned depending on your region and what was happening there. So you would have to make that choice at that time whether or not you were willing to give up your firearms for whatever martial law or foreign occupation scenario was occurring. Another crime that would be likely is to have to involve yourself with black market or barter type trade situations, which would be outside of official channels. And the trade is off the books, which means, taxing is no longer implemented, which may be breaking the law to some degree, but also it could be considered economic sabotage depending on what was happening there. This is actually one of the reasons why the British were starting to clamp down so hard on the Americans because of their underground economy that was operating in a way that was trying to avoid taxes and tariffs. So keep that in mind. Now, another one that is definitely likely to happen if a war breaks out on a large scale that we saw during the Vietnam War is draft dodging. That's a crime, and if you do it, you're going to get in trouble. However, some people would choose to do that, and during Vietnam, many Americans fled to Canada to avoid being drafted. So keep that in mind because that is something that a lot of people are likely going to commit. Just be aware of the fact that generally, if there is a conscription, you're better off volunteering and finding yourself in a better position. Now, there's also harboring fugitives, another crime that's likely to occur or be committed by you during a full-blown collapse or SHTF type scenario. Why is that? Because if anyone in your family is part of some kind of resistance movement or is willing to disobey whatever orders are coming down from the top at the time, well, there's a good chance that you could be considered an accomplice for harboring these fugitives or potential criminals in your dwelling. And if they're your son or your wife or your brother or whoever they might be, there's a good chance you're not going to kick them out, isn't there? So you'd have to make that decision at that point in time. Another one is going to be communication violations. Now, we already know the FCC has all of its rules about what radios you can or can't use and how high your wattage output can be and everything else related to that. But during an emergency, a lot of those rules go out of the window. But at a certain point in time or at a certain point, there could be additional restrictions placed, especially during some type of, let's just say, if the Revolutionary War type scenario in the United States were to happen in the future, again, well, I'm sure that the communications would be heavily restricted. And at that point in time, you'd have to decide if you're willing to use those communications or not, regardless of whether or not they're considered legal, right? Also, another one is going to be curfew or freedom of movement restrictions, okay? A violation of curfew could easily land you in hot water. And during martial law or any other highly restrictive scenario occurring here in the United States, they're going to limit freedom of movement. They're going to place a curfew. Now, because of that, you're going to have to decide if being out at night is the only option for you, or if being far away from your current location in order to escape whatever dangers there might be is more important than following the rules. And so at that point in time, you may have to choose to commit a crime in order to escape a more dangerous scenario. So that's just a short list of potential crimes that you could easily find yourself committing during a large scale emergency scenario, even if you're not currently a criminal. But if you've never committed a crime up until this point in your life, what's your willingness to do so during a survival scenario? And how will you react to it? Or will you just follow the rules because up until this point you have been the whole time? These are all things that you should be considering. They're not things that you have to concern yourself with right now in the sense of action, but they are things that make for good thought process exercises so that if you're ever faced with these dilemmas, you already have an idea of what that answer is going to be or where that line in the sand is going to be drawn for you. And this is something that I just wanted to touch base on because honestly, throughout my life, I may or may not have involved myself with some interesting things. But regardless of that, I also know where I'd be willing to cross some lines in order to maintain my and my family's survival during a long-term emergency scenario. But for many, this thought hasn't ever even crossed their mind, which is why I made this video. So think about it, understand that I'm pretty sure most of us are fine with the fact that our founding fathers committed crimes in order to get us to where we are now. I'm sure we can all understand and relate to why Ukrainians might be committing potential crimes in order to defend their country and stop a foreign invasion. So, why would we assume we wouldn't possibly do the same thing when faced with the same level of circumstance? If you want to support this channel, the description down below as well as the pinned comment will have links where you can do so. You can also go to magicprepper.com, which has a lot of resources, including things like discount codes or a Discord server that is free where you can network with other preparedness-minded individuals. And hopefully you understand, full disclaimer here, this video was just hypothetical, conceptual, and does not promote the idea of anybody breaking the law. And if anyone was to insinuate that that was my plan here, they would be lying and it could be considered slander. So, anything else you need from me at all, go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.